Welcome back to Face the State. I'm Ariana Bennett. Thank you for staying with us. Well, among the obvious responsibilities at the Nevada Department of Taxation, like tax collection and audits, there's one pretty unusual one. And because of the way the original system was set up, regulating Nevada's marijuana industry also falls under its umbrella. So I'm back with Bill Anderson to talk about all of that. Bill, thank you again for your time.
Thank you.
All right, it seems like a pretty weird fit putting marijuana in the Department of Taxation instead of like agriculture or health and human services or even giving it its own department. How did that happen?
Well, it was a decision on the part of public policymakers. But I mean, the bottom line is the state collects tax revenue from marijuana. And the home for the bulk of tax collections in the state is the Department of Taxation. So that, I believe, is the driving force behind placing that responsibility within our department. There are other entities involved, most notably part of the Department of Health and Human Services. They remain actively involved with the medical marijuana program.
So do you think, because you're relatively new to being in charge of this department, do you think that taxation is the best fit for marijuana regulation?
Oh, very much so. The governor gave us some directives when we started rolling the industry out. He wanted an industry that's well regulated, an industry that is responsible in terms of being a responsible partner in the business community, an industry that's restricted, and perhaps most importantly, an industry that's well respected. And I think we've been successful on those fronts. If you go out to other states, a majority of them look at Nevada as being the gold standard in terms of how we've rolled out the marijuana industry. Yes, there have been some bumps in the road along the way, but we haven't seen the problems that several other states have seen. We're not seeing oversupply, which leaks into the black market. So I think the manner in which we've rolled the industry out has been very responsible and very efficient.
It's an interesting thing to picture, I guess, because you'd imagine people who work at the Department of Taxation to be kind of accountant types, and then you have your weed side. So like, did you have to hire just a whole bunch of like a completely different type of staff, I imagine, to manage something like that?
Well, some staff came over from the Department of Health and Human Services, those that were affiliated or associated with the medical marijuana program. So we got some staff from there, and yes, we've hired some new staff. And in fact, because the industry has gotten off to a much stronger start than what was anticipated, a couple of weeks ago we appeared before the Interim Finance Committee of the legislature and requested successfully, for the most part, additional resources to help us maintain the momentum, especially from a regulatory standpoint that we've built up.
Right. So explain to people who, unless they work in the industry, probably don't realize what kind of regulations go into this.
Well, we regulate from a variety of standpoints. Licensing, we approve licenses. We have about, just on the adult use side, or the recreational side, we have about 116 cultivation licenses. We have about 80 production licenses. Perhaps most notably, we have about 61 retail licenses. You can basically double that when you add in the medical side of the market. So, we regulate through licensing. We collect taxes. Nevada has adopted a very stringent product testing program. Our goal is to protect the health and safety of Nevadans. And one of the ways we do that is via very strict and stringent and comprehensive testing programs.
And yet it hasn't hindered the growth of the industry at all. Obviously, the income from this has exceeded projections. I think the original idea was between 50 and 60 million in a year of revenue. And we're going to make that, right? We're going to pass that?
Right. We're 10 months into the fiscal year in terms of collections. We've collected through the month of April. We've collected about $55 million from our two major marijuana-based taxes, a wholesale tax and a retail tax. For the whole year, it was anticipated that we would collect about $50 million. So essentially, we're 10 months into the fiscal year. We've collected 110% of what was anticipated.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, it's a good shot in the arm, at least for the programs that it funds. So explain where that money goes.
The retail tax is probably the most straightforward. That's a 10% tax levied at the point of sale, final sale. All of that money goes directly into the state's rainy day fund. So to date, we have transferred over a little bit in excess of $34 million from that retail excise tax collection to the state's rainy day fund. Now, a 15% wholesale tax, that's a little bit different. That goes to 3 different pots. Right off the bat, we have to provide about exactly $5 million to localities around the states, counties, local jurisdictions in which there's a presence of the marijuana industry, to help them fund their own marijuana enforcement efforts. Then after that, we have to pay for our operating expenses, which isn't a huge amount, about probably when we close the books on this fiscal year, about $4 million. The remainder of that goes to the state's distributive school account. That helps to fund K through 12 education. We think that amount will probably come in at about $25 million for the just ended fiscal year.
I mean, it's not like a game changer, but it's definitely not nothing.
Oh, I think it's really more than a game changer. It's significant, you know, it provides, you know, much needed resources to the education community. So, I mean, from a budgetary perspective, I think it's been beneficial.
Now, does that money that gets raised and then in taxable sales goes to the state, then comes back, is it proportionate to the counties that have a bunch of legal marijuana sellers, or is that distributed evenly among the counties?
Well, in terms of the $5 million that flows back to jurisdictions, $1.5 million of that is divided equally amongst the state's 17 counties, whether there's a marijuana presence or not. So each county gets a little bit less than $100,000. Then the remaining $3.5 million gets distributed to local jurisdictions in which there's a marijuana presence. And it's a population-based distribution. So our larger population centers benefit the most from that $3.5 million distribution.
All right, well, we just have a little over a minute left, but you know, not every county has jumped on board the marijuana train. I think there are only a handful who are doing it. Would you say from the state's perspective that it would be beneficial to everybody to start opening up businesses and making it legal in their counties?
Well, that's a local decision. You know, we regulate the industry from the state perspective. So that will ultimately be a local jurisdiction. You know, broadening the question to nationwide, I think we're embarking on a period in which legal marijuana, both on the medical side as well as the adult use side, my guess will gradually expand to across states.
Yeah. All right. Well, we have 30 seconds left. Anything else you'd like the public to know about marijuana regulation?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, Nevada, I believe, is viewed as the gold standard. Other states oftentimes come to us and essentially say, how did you do this? And what advice would you have for us? So as department director, I'm very proud of that.
All right, Bill, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Ariana.
I appreciate it. All right, that is it for this episode of Face the State, but you can catch up on old episodes at ktvn.com. Thank you so much for being with us.